Hey, so today I wanted to do like a comparative anatomy sort of micro documentary thing, just for honestly my own enjoyment, of two of my species. On the top, we have the Sladnar, which are a four-armed race. They're the predominant race in my headworld galaxy. And then the Soturans, which are also very common, but very different. They're a bit more on the simian monitor lizard side of things, where the Sladnar are somewhere more like a gorilla horse. They're both definitely larger built species. They're muscular, although the Sladnar are a bit more stocky and burly, not as I'll use the word gymnastic, whereas the Soturans are more arboreal. They're able to get around a little bit quicker. They're more sinewy, a little rangier. And I'll be showing pictures of them when I upload this. Putting a note in here for me. Make sure you put pictures of these species. People are going to want to know what you're talking about. So this is just the comparative skull anatomy today. I'm not going to get into the rest of the bodies because, I mean, they have different amounts of limbs. There's a lot to go over. So I just thought it would be kind of fun to point this out. I thought, if nothing else, it's a fun exercise for people who do creature design. So getting into it, one of the first major differences on the interior level between these two is the spine attachment point. On the Sladnar, it is sort of between the perpendicular area, more like where a human skull would attach, sort of below the skull cavity, and something more like a mink, where it would attach way at the back. On a Soturan, it's all the way in the back, sort of more weasel-like, or even, I guess, like a horse. But the main difference is the jaw doesn't go all the way back. Like on a horse, typically the space between the back of the jaw and the spine is fairly small because the horse has a very, compared to its face and muzzle, it has a very small brain case. So the jaw comes further back and there's not a ton of space between the two. But on a Soturan, it's a little stranger. It's not as common, at least in the animals I've seen, but I like on certain animals there is that big space. So they've got this long, sort of lean head silhouette, very skinny from the side. But of course, on a musculature level, they're bulked out here. They have a very large gullet, more like an avian gullet, and they're able to swallow things sort of unchewed. They tend to just snap pieces off and swallow them. They do, I won't get into it, but they do have a bit of a crop type organ further down, where they would be, they'd use that to kind of bust apart some of the pieces they would swallow, which would then go into the rest of the digestive system, but they actually don't do a lot of chewing, unlike the Sladnar, which have these grinding molars, very common in mammals. They line up 1 to 1, they sit right against each other just about, and pretty big anchor here, muscle anchor on the jaw, more, not quite hippopotamus big, but big. So they have grinding teeth, and the front, this, I sort of was thinking of a camel. They've got the little, I think horses usually have some kind of a tooth here too. And they've got big, sharp, chomping, cutting incisors up front. And I think this is just more of a burr on the bone. It's not quite a horn, it's just sort of a nodule. But those do come through on the chin, and they do display kind of, not quite like a warthog, but sort of, they have these little bumps on their chin. They've got little bumps here too that are more just made of flesh, but they don't show up in the bone at all. It's just a fleshy protrusion, whereas these actually are bony tori of some kind that stick out. They both have pretty heavy forehead slopes where they go straight back, and then they have these, I think it's supraorbital tori, I think that's what they're called. They're the sort of the eyebrow bumps, very common in things like gorillas, and certain apes and monkeys will have this bone. I think baboons have something like this too. It's a cool feature. I'm a big fan of a heavy brow on a species. I don't know what it is, it's a design feature I'm very fond of, and I try to use in my things because I like it. So another thing is the one thing that really differentiates these guys is some of the openings on the head, like the ear. On them, it's further back, and this too would lead up to an ear that would come out right around here somewhere, externally. Sort of a leaf-shaped ear, like somewhere between a horse and a fruit bat. It's a bit larger on females, probably going maybe even a little past the head, and on a male it usually wouldn't break this area. Very small ear on a male, but the females have longer ears. It's one of the few features of dimorphism I've been able to figure out for them, but I like that. I think it's cute. And then on the Soturans, they don't have the ear hole down here. Theirs is actually it's a little slit right here on the side of their head. Physically, on an external level, they have a scale right about here, kind of like a crocodile, just above their ear hole. It's sort of a cute little, almost like a triangle keystone shape. And that's all they've got for an external ear. It's not they can't move it. I'm thinking maybe it can shut when they're underwater, but I haven't quite figured that out yet. I know their nostrils shut underwater, and they've got, you can see, so this is the red around the skull. On these, it represents the flesh. So this would be like if you shone a really bright light behind them, you might, like, obviously this would be darker, but it's sort of like this is the skin. This is the muscle, the skin, the fat, anything that isn't bone would be represented by the red. And this is just, if you stripped all that away, the skeleton inside. And these aren't like the only way they can look. Of course, there's tons of variety, just like in humans and dogs. They can look a lot of different ways, but these are really standard, bare bones examples of what the two mainly differentiate with. Some of these things are unchangeable, you know, like all of them will have the general same tooth alignment as one another. All Sladnar have this amount of teeth, and all Soturans have this amount of teeth. There are some dental conditions that they can have, particularly Soturans. They're prone to very unusual tooth growths. I won't get into that in this video, but maybe another time. But so whereas a Sladnar has the sort of tooth arrangement for cutting and grinding, suited to an herbivorous or even omnivorous lifestyle, Soturans, they've got teeth designed more for catching and piercing, and then actually puncturing back here. These are not grinding teeth. See how they zigzag? They interlock. This would be to bust open like a shell. So Soturans are dermophages. I think that's the term. Duraphages, sorry. They're duraphages. They engage in durophagy, which is the eating of things that have very hard external shells. This consists of fruit and things like shellfish, mollusks, crustaceans. They do eat softer-bodied prey too, which is why they have these sort of hook-shaped teeth up front. They don't typically eat fish, but they do eat a lot of aquatic creatures. Their planet doesn't have much in the way of fish, but they do have a lot of squid-type creatures and a lot of hard-bodied worms, and like polychaete worms, I guess, would be the best earth thing to compare them to. But they do have a lot of slithering prey, whether they're hard or soft-shelled, and they will need to be able to catch them, which is why they have these longer jaws, more suited for aquatic sort of catching. And that actually goes, it kind of works in line with the way their spine is attached, because they can flick these heads out rather quickly. I've actually got a diagram here to help us out with this. We've got this here. So this I made to sort of help me draw Soturans. This is one of my characters she happens to be a Soturan, so it works out well. But I put a wire in here to illustrate. So when her head is down and retracted like this, it doesn't appear very long of a neck, but when you extend, because of the location of the spine, it actually kicks out pretty far. So she will be able to extend that head out very quickly in order to catch things. But on the other side, she can also retract her head pretty far in against her neck and body. So big range of motion there allows for some interesting, not only fun to draw, but interesting lifestyles that you can work with a creature like that. That again goes to some of the comparative anatomy here. We've got the nostril holes on the Sladnar that are further forward, much more classic mammal ungulate kind of situation here with that sort of arrowhead shaped nostril alignment. Like from the top, it would be kind of that, almost like a chevron. And a pretty thin, sort of a very swooping brow to nasal area. They have a pretty narrow nose here. They do have little ridges on the outside on their flesh, and they have sort of like a tube nostril, two tubed nostrils that would end here. Their nose terminates sort of in a forward-facing tube nose. Not quite, it doesn't stand up quite like a tube-nosed bat, but they stand forward. Somewhere between a tube-nosed bat and like a baboon. They do have lips. They are fairly fleshy. They can move them a bit, but they actually have more of a cheek. Doesn't really show in this diagram being a skull, but a Sladnar's mouth, typically the corner of their mouth would end up somewhere right before the molar. A bit low hanging, very horse, mule kind of a sort of a mouth. It's not very long. It would not retract all the way back here. Even if they were grimacing, it wouldn't go much further than the first molar. So that's one of the main differences between the Sladnar and the Soturan, because Soturans have fleshy lips here, but it curves down here, but right about where the that sort of, I guess you could say, the more prehensile lip ends, a sort of neater, slimmer lip comes all the way back here. It actually hangs a little further back than the end of the mouth, because there's sort of instead of a cheek, they sort of have a pouching corner of the mouth, kind of like a bird would have, or a crocodile, like where you can have a bit of a seal. It's, I guess maybe a better comparison would be a monitor lizard. But it's not as hard as that. They do have a little bit more flesh to their lip, even though it's neat. They don't have a cheek. It's a very close to the bone sort of a lip. It seals, but it doesn't, if they open their mouth, they can't keep anything from falling out of the side of their mouth without a lot of effort, unlike a human or a horse, which has a cheek to store chewed food in. Soturans did not have that. They can't chew with their mouth closed, in other words. Sladnar have a little bit of an ability to keep food in their cheeks, which makes sense with the grinding. It's good to have a pouch with that. Soturans don't have that. They snap things off, break them open, and swallow them. So totally different eating style. They can eat some of the same things, but the way they would do it, very different. It's almost like a human peeling and eating a piece of fruit versus a cassowary grabbing it and just swallowing it without breaking it open at all, which is always a little strange to see, but that's just because we don't do that, and it's weird sometimes to picture animals swallowing entire pieces of fruit, because we would choke if we did that. So the Sladnar has a hyoid bone here that's pretty similar to a human hyoid bone. It's a very small, almost looks like a little shark jaw. So that's what theirs looks like. Not too unusual. This would anchor their tongue, which isn't really big. It's sort of a fatter, medium-sized tongue. Good for pushing food around in the molars. Not much else. They can't quite bring it around to lick the front of their teeth, but they can move food around in the mouth chamber. Soturans have a small, I guess the best thing I could think is somewhere between a bird and a lizard tongue. It's not very big. It's pretty thin. It's not a fat, wide tongue like a dog would have. You know, it's a definitely more reptilian looking tongue. But their hyoid bone is a little different because they have this gullet here. So their tongue attaches, instead of further back, like where a palate would be, on more like a human, their palate isn't further back like that. Their palate's actually about where the second molar is, right where that one starts. That would be, I guess you could say, where the tongue protrudes into the mouth. So if you look at them with their mouth open, there's this big gaping hole here, which leads right into the gullet. So that would make more sense for something that eats kind of like a cormorant or a pelican, where they're just going to be tossing big chunks of things like crab legs and shellfish back into their their digestive system. It's a pretty useful area for a tooth design like this. They complement one another. Just the different abilities. They do a lot of chewing, and they don't have these ones. The Sladnar don't have like a crop or a gizzard, you know, to crush things up afterward. They just they go straight to their stomach. But Soturans do have, I guess, their own kind of a crop organ that helps break things up. So the different eating styles lend to this. Another interesting thing is on the outside, they both have these very thick necks, but on close inspection, from the back of the head down, they look like they could almost take on some of the same silhouettes, other than the slightly longer neck of the Soturan. But really, inside, there's significantly more inflexibility going on here. They can't snake their neck like a Soturan can. They can sort of, they have a similar range to maybe a human. Pretty thick vertebrae with these big, almost like sails coming off the back, anchoring these pretty hefty back and shoulder muscles. They've got the 4 burly arms, so they have pretty heavy-duty muscles coming off the back of their head and in their neck. I haven't detailed those yet, but they're substantial, and it shows in the way that they look. Very thick arms. Whereas the Soturans have, they've got more like, I guess you could think of like a monitor lizard or a bird-style neck where it can arc and sort of sit against itself a bit more. So they can, as was demonstrated, draw their head pretty far in, and then also stick the neck pretty far out from their body. I sort of like that illusion-like vertebrae at the S shape, because in birds it's the same way. A lot of people are surprised when they see a bird with their head way in and then they stick it way out. And it's interesting because if you don't know a bird's anatomy, it can look kind of like a trick. Like, how did they make their neck get longer? But truthfully, it's just because it's hidden in the feathers and the skin. Without feathers, of course, there's a lot less of that illusion going on with the Soturan when their neck is drawn and you can see it, but it still can be surprising. I know I enjoy drawing it in both ways. I have, you know, if I have a character, I like drawing her with her head way tucked in and then also zooped out like a kind of like a bittern. So I think that mostly covers it. The only other major difference I think I would detail here is the eye sockets on the Sladnar are very forward facing. They don't have a whole eye sideways kilter to them. They would face sort of like that, like at that sort of an angle. Very forward. The skull as it is a bit, I think that's one of the things that makes it feel the most baboonish, if you will, is the forward-facing eye sockets. Whereas the Soturan, actually, as much as they have overlapping vision, like the Sladnar does, they have a lot more side. It's more like a dog, you know, they've got that, instead of being like this, it's a bit more like that. So they've got eyes that kick a little bit more out to the side. Not fully side visioned like a chicken, but they do have a lot more. They can see a lot more to the side and maybe even a little to the back. Not like the Sladnar, which their vision ends probably pretty similar to a human's vision. Their peripheral is more like that, whereas a Soturan has little less forward overlap between their eyes, and they have a blind spot to about here if they've got a nose that gets in the way. A lot of them do have pretty large fleshy nasal sacs and then nostrils that lay flat against their skull right here that can open and shut, whether they're underwater or not, because they don't swim so much as they wade. They're very heavy and dense, so they just shut their nostrils and kind of deep sea walk to catch most of their food. They're not particularly graceful swimmers. Some of them are manageable, but most don't come to it very naturally. Even though they eat a lot of sea creatures, most of them are either slow moving or benthic, so they're not too hard to catch even if you're just sort of moseying. They don't need to swim very fast to catch their prey, so they just seal their nostrils like a seal would. But yeah, their eyes they have a wider range of vision, but they do have a blind spot, whereas the Sladnar don't have any substantial forward-facing blind spots. But yeah, the Soturans, if you're here or closer, they might not be able to see something right there. So if they're up close and they're trying to look at you, they might turn their heads more like a bird, which can be kind of funny because you can look at them straight on from, more than a foot away. But if they're getting up close and they want to see something, they will tip their heads. So kind of interesting. And just another cute thing, I've got a little diagram here of the Soturan head. This one's sculpy, so it's not perfect, but it shows a little, it's kind of nice. It can show the way that the jaws seats together. You can get a little bit of it's not super symmetrical, but sort of a 3D view of that. Let me see if I can get it up here. There we go. But yeah, you can see the ear holes are right back here. The jaw, I want to say it's the zygomatic arch. I'm not really good with bone terminology, so you'll have to forgive me with that one. But yeah, see the teeth kind of interlock, and then there's sort of a cutting tooth here behind the top eye tooth. The top canine sits up against this there's two sort of shearing teeth back here. These are the puncturing teeth, and these are shearing teeth. So depending on what they're catching, they may press their teeth all the way down or just catch it like that just to grab it. This would, of course, sever maybe a tissue connection, but unless they were shearing a piece off, they may not want to do that. Sometimes they just wanted to catch something. So that's the major difference situation between these guys. I'd love to do more on these in the future, and honestly, main goal, I hope this motivated any creature designers to, I don't know, maybe want to get into researching animal bones and muscles, because it's really amazing. I love looking at the natural world and being able to just take inspiration. It's super fun because, can't do it better than it's already been done. But I really like being able to kind of reinforce ideas with things that actually exist, because it makes them so much more believable and it feels more real. And of course, if you have a species that eats a certain way or lives on a certain sort of lifestyle, finding animals or things that also do that is super helpful, and it can sometimes take an idea that didn't feel very substantial and really bring it into reality, because I find even the strangest ideas I've had, they're not any stranger than reality. But yeah, maybe I'll do another video like this in the future, but we'll see.